Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to be talking about a topic that is very confusing for a lot of people, and it is also very big if you're paying attention to the news right now. So hopefully I can clear a few things up for you and help you understand the Electoral College. That's what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so the Constitution's role. The framers of the Constitution debated how the president should be elected. They knew that this was going to be a very important office, so they wanted to make sure that they had a good system in place for electing one. The options that they considered included congressional selection, but then the people would have no say in the country's leader. Now this was the idea that Congress would choose who the president was. They considered it, but they wanted the people's opinion on who the president should be. They also talked about the direct popular election, but the framers feared who the people might select. The Electoral College was a compromise combining features of both of these roles. So they didn't want to go with direct popular election, which means everybody goes and votes, and then whoever ends up with the most people that vote for them wins. They didn't want to go with that, but they didn't want to go with the congressional selection where the people have no say. This also reflects federalism by ensuring slaves have a role in selecting the president. You know, they wanted to make sure that the states were going to have significant amounts of power in this new government, so they wanted to include the states in this process. Here's a quote from Alexander Hamilton. It says, "It was also peculiarly desirable to afford as little opportunity as possible to tumult and disorder. This evil was not least to be dreaded in the election of a magistrate, who was to have so important an agency in government as the president. But the precautions promise an effectual security against this mischief. The choice of several to form an intermediate body of electors will be much less apt to convulse the community with any extraordinary or violent movements than the choice of one who was himself to be the final object of the public wishes." Alexander Hamilton. So this is saying that they were nervous about leaving it up to a direct popular vote, meaning a vote by the people, because they were afraid of tumult, disorder. They were afraid that there would be like a big group of rebels who would end up voting for someone who was not good for the country. So the idea of having this electoral college of these electors would be to help bring any sort of uprising like that into check. How the Electoral College works. So what is it? What does it do? Why do we have it? Under this system, each state is worth points based on their representation in Congress. Now, the representation in Congress is based on population, so the more people you have, the more representatives you have in the House of Representatives. Every 10 years, the U.S. Census is taken to determine how many representatives each state will have in the House of Representatives. So every 10 years, they do the United States Census and determines the number of representatives. This number helps determine the number of electors for each state as well. So if you're wondering how many electoral votes each state gets, they take the House of Representatives, they add the Senate, and that is the number of electoral votes. So if you, as you know, in the Senate, every state has 2 senators. And in the House of Representatives, that is based on the population of the state. The more people in your state, the more members of the House of Representatives your state gets to pick. So, here in West Virginia, we have 3 members of the House of Representatives, and we have 2 members of Senate, so we have 5 electoral votes in the state of West Virginia. So, who are the electors? They are appointed by each state legislature. Electors must be loyal political party members. So, if you are an independent, you can't be an elector. Any eligible voter can be an elector, including you. Electors may not hold any other office and do not get paid and have other jobs. So if you are a senator, you cannot also be an elector. So they have to be, they can't hold any office. Electors' names appear on the ballot under the candidate they will vote for. So here is one from the past where it's giving the names of the people that will vote for each of these candidates. One advantage of electors is that as candidates and still more as competitors, personal known in the districts, they will call forth the greater attention of the people. Another advantage is that they may be intentionally left sometimes to their own judgment, guided by further information than may be acquired by them. And finally, what is of material importance, they will be able, when ascertaining, which may not be till a late hour, that the first choice of their constituents is utterly hopeless, to substitute in their electoral vote the name known to be their second choice. So electors are not bound by the Constitution or by any federal law to vote the way that the people of their state vote. The idea of that is, if the people of a state vote for one candidate over another, say they all vote for candidate A, and candidate A wins the state summarily, well, under the original idea, they are not bound to vote for that person. They don't have to. But a lot of states have a state law that says that if the people of the state vote one way, the electors have to. So that is on a state-by-state basis. Okay, here's a look at the map of the United States, and it shows the number of electoral votes that each state has. So as you look around, you can see the big ones. California, that's the biggest one. That's the one that has the most number of electors, has the most members of the House of Representatives. They have 55 electoral votes. Whereas over here, West Virginia has 5. Now, there are 2 states that do this differently. In most states, it is a winner-take-all system. Now, what that means is, let's take West Virginia for example. The people of West Virginia, we go and we cast our votes, and let's say that 60% of the people vote for candidate A. Well, under a winner-take-all system, all 5 of West Virginia's electoral votes will go to candidate A, to the candidate who got the majority of the votes. Now, if you look here at Nebraska, at Maine, they do things a little differently there. They do it proportionally, where they can have a split electoral vote, and it is all based on the percentage of voters that they get. So it is possible for the candidates and those for both candidates to get votes from those states. In the most recent election, in the 2020 election, Nebraska was split, and I believe Maine was split as well. So they split their electoral votes. But in the majority of the rest of the country, it is based on a winner-take-all scenario. So if you get 60% of the votes in West Virginia, you get all 5 votes. If you get over 50% of the votes in Texas, you get all 38 votes. So that just goes to show that it's all based on population. It is not based on land area. Okay? It is not based on land area. If you look at North and South Dakota, they have 3 votes each. But if we look over here at little bitty Rhode Island, they have 4 votes. Now if you look there, you're like, well, Rhode Island is tiny. Why does it get more votes? Well, because it has more people. North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, they are all very sparsely populated states, meaning that there are people there, but they're spread out. There's not a lot of people, there's not a lot of major cities there. So Rhode Island is much more densely populated. So based on the population of the state, that determines the number of electoral votes. Okay, and I'm sure if you've paid attention to the news recently, you've seen a map similar to this. Now, this is from the 2016 election. So if this looks different than what you've seen on the news, this is based from 2016. Now, whenever they start to report the findings of the votes from an election, they will put up a map like this. If it's highlighted in red, that means it went to the Republican candidate. If it's highlighted in blue, it means it goes to the Democratic candidate. So as you can see here, in the 2016 election, it was vastly red, vastly Republican. Now, you'll notice that California and New York, they both went blue. Now, there are what are called swing states. A swing state is one that does not traditionally stick to one or the other. California is traditionally going to be a blue state, a Democratic state, just due to the culture of the state and the people that live there. Most of the time, they are going to vote for the Democratic candidate. Okay, how does the election work? There are 538 total electors. Whoever wins the popular vote in each state gets all of that state's electoral votes. To win the presidency, a candidate needs at least 270 electoral votes. If no candidate reaches 270, then the House of Representatives votes to decide the president. So if at the end of the election, if there is not a chosen winner, it goes to the House of Representatives to decide the president. So like I said, 270, that is to get the majority. So that is how you are elected president. Now, back to what I was saying about swing states. Some states will traditionally vote one way or another. Like I was saying before, California traditionally votes Democratic. New York traditionally votes Democratic. Mississippi, Alabama, those traditionally will vote Republican. It's just due to the different cultures of the state and how the people there traditionally vote. For many years, West Virginia traditionally voted Democratic. In recent years, though, West Virginia has seen a shift to voting mostly Republican. So, but there are states that are called swing states. And what these swing states are states that are pretty close 50-50 on Democrats and Republicans there. So one year it might be red, the next year might be blue, and it switches back and forth. These are the ones that will typically decide the election. You know, a Republican is not going to campaign or spend much on advertising in California because traditionally California is going to vote blue, so a Republican candidate isn't going to waste their time and money in California or the one in New York. Just like how a Democratic candidate is not going to campaign much in Mississippi or Alabama because they know that those states are going to vote Republican. Now, these states that switch back and forth, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, those states do switch. Those are what are called swing states. Florida is another swing state. Florida switches back and forth, and we're going to see how that affects where they spend their money in the next map, or coming up. Okay, here is another type of map to look at the votes. Now, I know this doesn't look like a traditional map like you're probably used to seeing, but once again, this is based on the 2016 election, which was Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, and this map is kind of broken down where the size of the state is based on the number of votes it gets. So as you can see here, California over here, CA, that means California, has 55 votes. Texas has 38. But then little bitty North Dakota, South Dakota, they only have 3 each. So they're much smaller. If we look on traditional map, North Dakota, South Dakota, pretty good sized states. but they only have 3 votes. So if we switch back to here, they're very small. This is a good way to kind of illustrate the voting power of each state. Because whenever you look at a traditional map, you might see so much land that goes to one candidate. Well, that's all well and good, but if there's only 3 or 4 electoral votes there, it doesn't really help them win the election very much. So that can make a map look unfair whenever one color, majority of the states aren't that color, but the other person wins. Well, it all depends on the population of the state. Some issues with the Electoral College. It is possible to win the popular vote but lose the Electoral College. You might be thinking, how is that possible? Well, you can get the majority of people to vote for you and still lose the election, because once again it is based on those electoral votes. In the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but as we all know, the election went to Donald Trump, and that was due to the Electoral College, the electoral votes. Another issue with the Electoral College is neither Constitution nor federal law requires electors to vote according to state popular vote. So this can cause a lot of people to be upset, but like I said earlier, traditionally, or a lot of states have state laws that say that their electors have to vote with the people. And several swing states get almost all the attention in an election year. We're gonna look at this map here, and it's gonna show which states are the swing states. These maps show the amount of attention given to each state by the Bush and Kerry campaigns during the final 5 weeks of the 2004 election. At the top, so at this top map here, each waving hand represents a visit from a presidential or vice presidential candidate during the final 5 weeks. So the final 5 weeks before the election, that's whenever everything is going to go, that's whenever they are really campaigning hard, because they're trying to get those last minute people to make up their minds. So if we look over here, we see all kinds of visits, all kinds of these purple waving hands. All kinds of visits to Florida, to Ohio, PA, Michigan, Wisconsin. You know, they're all over the place there. But if we look at Texas, nothing. We look at West Virginia, there's 1. Why is that? Well, because these are the swing states. These are the ones that you can't really count on them to vote one way or another. So a lot of candidates will focus their attentions there. Now, at the bottom, each dollar sign represents $1 million spent on TV advertising by the campaigns during the same time period. And once again, we're going to see similar things down here. We see all kinds of money spent on advertising in Florida, money in PA, and money in Ohio, Wisconsin, you know, the same ones again. Those are the swing states. Those are the ones that a lot of people, whenever they are trying to predict an election, they know that California is going to go Democratic, New York is going to go Democratic. Like I said earlier, Alabama, Mississippi, those are typically going to go Republican. So they don't really focus a whole lot of campaigning there, because those states pretty much have already been decided. Also, the states that don't have a lot of electoral votes typically don't get a lot of attention. We'll talk about us. Let's talk about West Virginia. Typically, presidential and vice presidential candidates don't show up in West Virginia all that much. Maybe once or twice. But, I mean, there's only 5 electoral votes to be won here. You know, so it doesn't really... They only have so much time and money to campaign, so it doesn't really make sense for them to waste their time campaigning in West Virginia to win a measly 5 electoral votes, whenever they could focus their energy somewhere where there is more votes that might switch to their side. So that's why you don't hear a lot about presidential candidates visiting West Virginia. Presidents who didn't win the popular vote. It is possible to win the election and not win the popular vote. In 1824, John Quincy Adams. He won the election, but he did not win the popular vote. 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes. Again, 1888 with Benjamin Harrison. In the election of 2000, this was George W. Bush versus Al Gore, and Al Gore got the popular vote, but George W. Bush got the electoral vote. And much more recently, in 2016 with Donald Trump. Now, the 2000 election was probably the first election that I kind of paid attention to. And that was just, I was 12 years old then, so I mean, I wasn't really following each and every state and who's voting which way and all that, but I was aware that it was happening. You know, I remember my parents and grandparents talking a lot about it. But that was probably the first election that I can really remember happening and like paying attention to and knowing about it. And that was a highly contested election. It took a lot of time to figure out a winner, and that is a whole story for another time. So guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you have any questions, I hope I kind of cleared up the Electoral College for you. I know it is a complicated, convoluted process, and if you have any questions about it, you know how to get a hold of me. So send those in, and I will do the best I can to answer your questions. I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll see you again real soon.